today's episode, we're going to cover highlights from a national webinar that we did called Effectively Working Remotely. I recorded this webinar with Becky Dunlap, and we're going to cover some tips from those of us who have done it for quite a long time, along with ideas for time management and accountability, the benefits and the pitfalls of working from home, and including culture changes that may happen in our organizations, and tools and technologies that may be important for you. Please like our channel and subscribe, and leave any comments below that you'd like to, and also enjoy. Thanks. So the first thing I want to talk about for a lot of you, and we'll cover this relatively quickly, but this is really important. Working from home is different than working in an office. And so making sure that whether you're a leader or a manager trying to help your staff adjust, or you are a person who's just been suddenly pulled to work from home, here's some key tips that we have found are really helpful. The very first thing is to make sure that you have good internet and phone connections. Obviously, this is the hardest part. And one of the things about this is that if you're a leader and you're expecting your staff to work from home, and they may not have good internet from home, one of the things that we had to do was we had to make sure that we paid for a mobile hotspot in a smartphone for anybody that we expected to work remotely. Because good internet, we've got several of our folks who work remotely in like small towns that don't have great internet. We often have the ability you might want to check and see if your libraries are still open and if they have study rooms, because if you are really struggling on this aspect, staff can go to a study room at a library, or even sometimes you can sit in the parking lot of a library and get free wireless. And so having access to good internet is really, really important. The next piece here is to make sure that you set aside a space at home. And this is especially true if you've got other family members or, especially kids. Make sure that you let everybody know in your family that and even if you're by yourself, I find this really helpful. The very first thing I always do wherever I go is I set up an office. And for me, that's usually a place to plug in my laptop, often a keyboard or a mouse, and that it's my designated space to work. And when I was going to NC State getting my PhD, I had to make sure that I always had the place. It was a little teeny studio apartment. I had to have a place that was a workplace, and then the rest of my apartment was for some places for sleeping, some places for eating, making sure that you have the functions in your home very, very clear so that you are not trying to, the hardest thing in the world is if you're in the habit of working with your laptop on your couch with the family, you're not going to be very productive. And so making sure that you know where you're going to work and set aside that space, and that's a workspace. And this also helps you mentally set a balance for work and home. And so, obviously, if you're a full-time employee and you're now being asked to work full-time for 40 hours a week, that can be really, really challenging with all of the other distractions that are there. It's really easy to sometimes I would find that, when I have a big deadline, that is the time that my oven just has to be cleaned. It's really important at that point. And so I have to make sure that my workspace is away from, stress cleaning. We joke about that. Are you a stress cleaner? If you're under stress, that may seem like that's the most important thing, is to do that laundry rather than to sit down at your desk and get something done. But by forcing yourself to have a place to go and to be there will make you much more functional. And so the idea of functionality is also making sure you have a good chair. If you're going to try and sit and work on your computer for 8 hours a day, you want to make sure that you've got a nice ergonomically correct space. You don't want to be working slouched in an easy chair because your body will hurt. And the other part here is finding, the right light. Otherwise, if you're working under poor light, or if you're in a place that's really drab because you've just stuck yourself in a corner, you're not going to be very enthusiastic and you get mentally tired. And so part of this is learning how to help if you're helping your staff understand that the very first thing they need to do is set up a place where they can function effectively. And if you're working from home, sometimes you have to trick yourself into it. You have to be in a way to make yourself go, okay, here's when I'm going to work. One of the other things here, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but the beauty part is if you are working from home, you can get up and take a walk. One of the things that we know is that in an office, that studies have shown that on an average workday of an 8-hour workday, people are only productive on average about 5 hours a day. Now, working from home, we're not saying you should only be working 5 hours a day, but what you should do is make sure that you are setting up blocks of time where you are really going to focus on the tasks that you have to do. And so this piece of setting up your space is about getting your mind into the work that you're supposed to do. So the other part of this is the shift into making yourself accountable for your own self, because there is no boss there walking by your office to see if you're working. There is nobody there checking on you. So you really have to take self-responsibility to make sure that you are actually getting the work done. And it's an entirely different mindset. As a leader and a coach, you can kind of help your staff understand that you're kind of expecting them to kind of kick it up a notch. You're not there to look over their shoulders. And in some ways, it's a shift from looking at making sure that people are there into making sure that things get done. And we'll talk more about that in a second. This last little box I have down here, getting dressed and ready for the day. I mean, I know how tempting it is to sit every day and work in your yoga pants. And I do that sometimes. But the reality is if you can have yourself set up a routine where you get up each day. And I like to do my workout in the morning. So I do put my yoga pants on when I get up, and then I'll do my whatever workout I do for that day. But then when it's time for me to start the day and get on I'm doing 7 or 8 Zoom calls a day at this point. When it's time for me to actually get to my desk, I make sure that I am dressed, because it makes me in the work mode. And it's in some ways I'm just tricking myself. And so these are just tips to help you become more effective at what you're trying to do. And we don't know if this is the new normal. I mean, all of us recognize that these are very unusual times, and we don't know if this is going to last for a couple weeks or a couple months, hopefully not longer than that. But how can you take best advantage of this time? So a lot of you asked about management and accountability. And one thing that we use is that every single person is responsible for maintaining their own structure and their own time blocking and their own work plan. And so there's a variety of different ways that you can do it. And this is up to your agency, and obviously there's going to be a whole heck of a lot of opinions about this. For us, I don't really care when our staff work. And so even if we were typically working 8 to 5 in our offices when we were at the GreenPlay headquarters, when people start working from home, we have people who are morning people and people who are night people. And as long as people are committed to doing roughly 8 hours of work, then what I would say is have them pick the 8-hour block and put that on their work plan. When are you going to work? So if people want to get up in the morning, or there's lots of kids at home and they need to do homeschooling during the day, that set up the time blocks so that they can work in the evening if they don't have to be responsive to customers or managing something that is time responsive. We do have some administrative staff that still work a typical 8 to 5 because they need to be available during those times. But if that's not something that you have to do, you might want to rethink it, because what we're trying to do is get to the effectiveness. And some people are naturally more effective if they're following their own circadian rhythms. And so in some ways, it's going to be a challenge. And we know this. If we do go back to working in the office and suddenly people have gotten used to doing their best work in the evenings because that's when they think, that's going to be something to address from a cultural standpoint. But it also gives us a whole opportunity to really evaluate, how are we working? And I think that's, one of the blessings that's coming out of this craziness right now is that we have the ability to really think about how we work and how people can help themselves be happy, healthy, and productive on a daily basis. And so the other part of this is, so for work plans, I know on some of the listservs that I'm part of, people have asked, are there work plan templates? This graphic that I've showed here is actually a Microsoft Word template. You can just Google work plan template and it'll pop up, and it's free. And you can use this to help each person set up, and at the top, instead of phases, you could put days. You can set this up however it makes sense for you. But the key thing is to have the to-do list for every single day. And so if you're leading a team, you want to make sure that all of the people that are on your team have work plans that you can see. And what we typically do is I'll review work plans every single Monday. It used to be that I had my staff do their work plans, and they had a choice. They could either do it in a table format in Microsoft Word, kind of like this template, or they could do it in an Excel chart. And some people liked that better. And I said, I don't care myself which format you're using, as long as you are picking a way to record what your work plan is, and also making sure that those tasks are actually going to fill the time that we're expected you to work and that you're paying attention to. So this is one example of a system that we use. And so this is how we used to do it. We used work plans that were submitted to me by email every Monday. And then we had regular weekly calls to review the work plans. And at that point, we could decide on tasks that needed to be done and kind of what the expectations are. And a lot of you are working under completely different conditions than you were when you were working in the centers or in places that were open and are now closed. So this is really strong time to go, okay, well, what else can you focus on that you are still working? We actually, and Becky's going to talk about all the different types of project management online software. We looked at Trello, we looked at a variety of ones that Becky's going to mention. We chose to use Rike, which is another one, and partly because we're very project focused, and so this is an example of one of our marketing staff's work plan, where basically what I have, as you see here, all of the staff that we have now, I have their to-do list. Becky's to-do list is right there. I have access to everybody's to-do list, and then when we look at it, we can look at it through either boards, like Trello uses a lot of boards, or a table format, or a Gantt chart format. So this allows me as a manager to look at the various different types of tasks that everybody has. And then you can set up due dates. You can see if something's overdue, and then we can have a conversation about why. So I think the key thing that I want to focus on is just as a leader, we want to make sure that we are very, very clear in setting our expectations for staff about what we want them to do during this time period, and also how can we do it and why it's important. The why is a huge piece. And so making sure that people are not just told, well, go home and do something, that we actually have had communication about what's going to be helpful. And it's a really great time to catch up on things that you've always been thinking you wanted to do, but you didn't have time to do because you were so busy being responsive in the field. As you're thinking about this, are you all still really engaged? One thing that we know is that attention spans, especially when somebody's looking at something online, like an online webinar, it's really easy to be checking your phones at the same time, or I like this, removing the cat from the keyboard, all of this different stuff. And so knowing that we are really focusing on all the different things that we have there, are you still there? Are you still paying attention? But the key part for me is to talk about this. It is hard to be home working by yourself from a computer all day. But, and so for people who are more of an introverted personality, it's almost like a relief. Oh, yay, I don't have to be around people all day. But if you're an extrovert, the struggle is so real, as Allison just said. Yes, I can see that. Yes, the struggle is real. And so the relief at seeing other human beings or connecting. It's funny, I will be on Zoom for 8 hours during the day, and then I will have Zoom meetings at night with the people that some of my friends. And so that connection is very, very important. All right, I want to move forward. And Becky, I want to have you talk a little bit about kind of your adaptation as you've gone to remote, because I know you've done that for a couple of years now, but yeah.
Yeah, so what I wanted to do is share my perspective and then talk about where you all are right now. So it was probably about 3 years ago now that I made the full transition to working with GreenPlay and thus working completely remotely with some travel. And so if you can kind of stick with me and realize all these different changes that happened, it felt like overnight, and same thing that happened to you. So see if you can relate to any of these. So 40 plus hours in the office or rec center to working completely remote plus plus traveling. Work was determined completely by the patrons that walk in the door, the team members that bring different problems to me, my bosses. That was how my work was determined. But now it's determined by the projects that I have and the different things that come up, the initiatives that I want to bring up. And so it's a lot different now. I get to decide and prioritize those different problems and tasks. I used to have a team meeting every week, and now we do team meetings virtually, which is a little bit different. And we also have in-person quarterly retreats. But moving to remote communication is one of the most difficult things, because working remotely, it can be a little isolating. And so you have to find ways to communicate with your team members. And we're going to talk about that more, but sometimes just picking up the phone or asking if someone's available on Zoom and doing a quick call can really make a difference in your day. And then the last one here is probably one of the biggest things is you have your boss and your coworkers down the hallway. You can just quickly go down there and ask them a question, or ask for their advice. And now Teresa works across the country. I live in Georgia. She lives in Colorado. And my coworkers are now my husband, who also works from home, and my baby and my dog. And those are some of the most difficult coworkers. I love them to death, but some of the most difficult coworkers, because you have to learn how to not only communicate your needs with them and tell them when you're going to be working and what you need, but you also have to be accountable to yourself and make sure that, like Teresa was saying, you set up your space so that it's productive, and set up a schedule that works for you. So here are some of the benefits and challenges of remote work, and then I'm going to talk about some strategies to deal with those. So first of all, benefits from working from home. The biggest thing is the flexibility. So you get to decide your day. I know, I think Tina had I believe she had a recommendation of a book by Daniel Pink called When. And I haven't read that yet, but I've heard good things about it. But it's all about just finding when you're most productive. That's the most important thing, is about knowing yourself enough to know when you're going to get the most work done. The second benefit to me is just more time with my family. I love my family. And most people work so that you can make a living to go support your family. So now you get to spend more time with them. You get to work from the comfort of your home. We try to get changed every day, but yoga pants are a benefit. And you have zero commute, right? So any of you guys who are having to travel 30 minutes to an hour and a half, that's completely cut down. You can get more work done. But some of the challenges that come to that is, a lot of them for me come from distractions of modern life. So there's social media, there's TV, there's, food, there's your kids and your pets, and I need to go for a walk. And I haven't gotten to the cleaning my oven part yet, Teresa, but laundry comes up a lot for me. So there's so many different things, and no one's going to come behind you and say, hey, why aren't you working on this? Hey, I thought this was due at this time. It really is a lot about self-discipline and accountability to get those things done. Number 2 is sticking with the routine. And I know it's so hard and your routines are completely up in the air right now, but if you can stick to your same wake up time and get your breakfast and now say, okay, this is the start of my day at 8 a.m., you're going to be so much better off if you get a certain amount of hours in every day, and you can look back and say, well, I had somewhat of a regular, typical work day, even though it was filled with some other things too. Dealing with new kinds of coworkers, as we talked about, and you guys, it sounds like you have active 5-year-olds, kids, husbands. It's hard because luckily we now have 3 stories. So my husband works in the basement, I work in the upstairs office, so we don't compete, but I can imagine if you're working in an apartment or a smaller house, competing for conference calls would be really difficult.
There are so many different types of tools out there, and we're going to talk a little bit about what works for us. And then we're also going to really help looking at different types of tools that might help some of the other things that you all have mentioned.
The first thing is, we're always going to start by identifying the problem to solve, because there are so many tools out there. It can be tempting to look at the shiniest one, the cheapest one, the most expensive one, and just kind of assume that that's the best. The fact is, you need to identify your problem that you're trying to solve first. And we need to find the best tool to fit the needs of your organization. So knowing, we're going to talk some of the different resource and barriers that you're going to have to talk and work through. And then just set your expectations appropriately when it comes to training time. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so we would love to be able to say, is your team ready for this? In the future, digital technology, no. Right now is the time. Ready or not, we need to find ways to adopt this technology and have it work for us. So if you happen to be leading this effort, or you're managing people that are, you're going to want to figure out who are your advocates for this new technology. So as Teresa was saying, I've kind of been the one that has been researching a lot of technology, and I've been trying to get our team on board, but everyone has different skill levels and everyone has different experiences. A lot of times when I offer up a new training tool, and this goes for anything. If you have you ever offered up a new idea and you say, oh, well, we've done that before, that didn't work for us. I think as an early adopter, you have to come in with a mindset that says, okay, tell me more about that. Why did that happen? What were the barriers that made this unsuccessful? If you had more training, would it have worked out better for you? If you had someone, on your side and or just like a open office hours time on Zoom, could you learn those different things? I think it's really important to take a hard look at who might be those advocates, but also who might be those resistance and those barriers and those points of resistance. So if you know that someone is going to kind of slow down this adoption process, talk with them directly and just have a one-on-one conversation and say, hey, we're thinking about adopting this new technology. What do you think about this? Or what would make it better? And what are some of your some issues with this? And once you figure out those, they're probably a reflection of the larger team and some of the other questions that are going on. So that can be really helpful. As far as how long training will take, we would love for, I would say 3 months or so, people can really start getting comfortable. A year down the road, you might really get the hang of it for a more complex tool. But I mean, what do we have? A couple days, maybe a week to get on board. There's so many different training resources out there. And a lot of times it's just going to take experimentation and trial and error. So maybe ask your team to just hang in there with you and let them know, hey, it might be a wild ride, but we have to find ways to communicate and manage online. Would you be willing to try this out? Let's do it. And also ask yourself, what happens if this fails? A lot of you, we've started with a lot of different tools and we've experimented a lot. Slack was one of those examples, but then for us, it didn't work out. And we ended up using, we went back to email for some things. We use text, we use our phone. So, every tool doesn't have to work out the first time. Also ask yourself, what are you willing to invest in to make this a success? If you don't have the money, do you have the time? Do you have those people on your team that can help you? And then finally, is there someone that went right before you that can help you out and make the transition a little bit easier for you?
These are the primary tools that we use at GreenPlay and GP Red now. So, Reich, I talked about that. We use that as our project management and work plan tool. And I'm not, we're not selling any of these. We're just letting you know what we found work. And Becky did a lot of research. We went back and forth. We did a lot of team meetings to get people on board. I recognize that at this point in time, you may not have that time to do a full, technology committee kind of thing. But so I wanted to share these. We use Dropbox for sharing large files. If you may have VPN connections, and for some people, the hardest part here is getting your technology, your IT folks to help everybody be set up at home so you have access, but that's the technology there. Obviously Zoom. I can't stress how much phone and text, we use that constantly. So it's always a matter of like, oh, should we do Zoom? Typically we err to using Zoom because it's easier to communicate. You can actually see facial features. You can see, people raising their hands over doing like a phone conference, but if some people aren't comfortable with that. So pick the tool that works. We do use SurveyMonkey if we're collecting information either from the public, doing a lot of user surveys, or if we're collecting information from a lot of different people that we want to quickly tabulate. And then Bang the Table is a new tool. It's an online engagement platform. So we do a lot of our work in engaging the public for agencies. And so doing focus groups and public meetings and council meetings and board meetings, and really trying to get people to tell us what they think. So Bang the Table is a new online engagement platform. The one thing that email of course works, but and Becky mentioned the Slack. We tried to incorporate Slack for GreenPlay, but some of our folks just would not pick it up, and we found that if not everybody was on it, it wasn't working. So for a lot of those features, we're still just using either text or email. So you may have to just kind of figure out what works for you. All right, Becky, you want to talk a little bit more just real quick about this?
Yes, so you guys are using Zoom right now, whether you knew it or not, as this is actually the public webinar feature. So if you look on the top right, this is probably the most public that we can get, right? It's broadcast to everybody, and we also use this for public meetings too. We use external meetings with our clients, anything from internal meetings and one-on-ones. There's also a chat feature that's similar to Slack in Zoom as well. So it is a success story for us because we're able to use it for a lot of different functions. So there are some free resources that I found specifically, like I know Microsoft Teams, they said that they're free for 6 months for government organizations. That might be something to look at. I know a lot of you use Outlook, so you can't use Google, but they have advanced Hangouts that are free until the summer. And then Facebook Workplace Advanced is also free until June. And so these are different tools that you might want to use. Zoom is also free for one-on-one calls for as long as you want, or up to 40 minutes if you're in a group call. And free conference call is also a good one if you haven't heard of that yet.
So the last thing that we wanted to really cover is just this, that what we're seeing a strong need from a lot of colleagues, a lot of agencies are calling and trying to figure out how to do board council meetings, committee meetings, and that sort of thing. So we just wanted to show, these are the features that we can help facilitate. So if you are struggling with how to set this up in-house, one of the things that Becky is available, obviously, if we're starting to work with you, we would need to talk about what that would take, but we can help you so you may not have to completely invest in, we have invested as an organization in all of these tools. So if you just want somebody to help you do them on a temporary basis, feel free to get in touch with either one of us. Actually, you can just email, I'll put the information at the end and just say, hey, we need help with this. We've got council meetings that we're facilitating, and we can get around the public meetings laws because as long as they're open to the public and widely advertised, we do have safeguards in place so that people can have to register so that they can't, I've heard somebody say, well, somebody use Zoom to show porn on an open meeting. Well, we want to make sure we're protecting against that. So the whole point here is so that you can then record the events just like we are doing. You can archive, we can get them out, and we can save these things. So in a lot of ways, I know that we have covered a ton of stuff here very, very quickly, but we want to be able to, we're really trying to help you figure out all the different ways that you can communicate and get what you need done. This episode of GP Red Presents is part of a GP Red special initiative called Operation Recreation Response, with a focus on helping agencies prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters. If you are interested in becoming involved with ORR, please email info@gpred.org.